So this is part 2 of a kind of an introductory take on psychoanalysis. If you've seen the first part, you will know that we have just left this child, probably male child. Theory works more coherently for the male child. We've just left him having passed through the Oedipus complex, having repressed the desire for the mother, which has been prohibited by, not necessarily by literally the father, but by something other than the mother, by a third. I think this is what psychoanalysis is all about. It's about thirds. It's about three-person relationships. I'm going to do a film about that actually as well, because I think that's the most. We can talk about the Oedipus complex, we can talk about infantile sexuality, we can talk about all sorts of the classic tropes of psychoanalysis, but really it's about thirds, in my opinion. So, the child now has the beginnings of a kind of seemingly unified place and a seemingly unified world, and we call that an ego. It's the beginning of an identity, a sort of fairly fixed sense of identity. And all of this means, in order to have that fixed place in a fixed world, those chaotic, anarchic, wild, unstructured desires have to be repressed. You can see from that we've now got a split that's happened in this very young child subject. A split between what's conscious, fixed, structured, on the one hand, and what on the other hand is really radically other. It's unconscious, it's been repressed, it's not accessible to consciousness. We've got this real split in the subject, and Lacan, this is at the heart of Lacanian theory really, this divided subject. So we've got the creation of an unconscious, which I say is inaccessible, and it kind of is inaccessible, but we can see glimpses of it. We see glimpses of it in dreams, most famously, which Freud describes. I think it's Freud, I've got a quote here, which I think is Freud, it might be Eagleton actually, describing dreams, but as symbolic fulfillments of unconscious wishes. This is what a dream in Freudian theory is. And these, in dreams, we have an unconscious wish which needs to be symbolised somehow. If it remains real, it's just too traumatic, it's unbearable, we wouldn't be able to sleep. And Freud's theory of dreams is that they enable us to sleep by symbolising these unconscious desires. And it's the ego which really leads this symbolising process. It kind of encodes our desires, our traumatic or prohibited desires. It encodes them, it condenses different meanings together into single images. It produces metaphors, it swaps one meaning for another. It displaces meanings onto something else. It scrambles, it does all sorts of kind of coding work. And particularly the unconscious makes great use of images, and the ego works with those images to kind of turn them into dreams. So famously Freud says that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, but there are other ways that we see the unconscious coming out. It's the famous Freudian slip. There's a great Freudian slip which I heard the other day, where somebody had said, this is not somebody that I've seen, but somebody had said to their therapist, "I really missed not coming last week." And what consciously they meant to say was, "I really missed coming," but what they said was, "I really missed not coming," and that double negative reveals exactly what unconsciously they meant to say, which was, I deliberately didn't come last week, I didn't want to come last week, I probably don't want to be here now. So in these slips we see glimpses of the unconscious, in forgetting things for no apparent reason, for those kind of repeated acts, repeated relationship acts, jokes. Freud wrote a whole book on jokes and how they reveal the workings of the unconscious. But I guess for psychoanalysis, one of the most important, certainly in terms of the analytic setting, one of the most important ways that we see a glimpse of the unconscious is through symptoms. I'm not going to talk too much about symptoms, but if we have a desire which will not stand repression, it won't accept being repressed, but equally it can't be expressed because it's unacceptable, there needs to be some kind of compromise there. And that's exactly what a symptom is. It's a compromise. It's a kind of a protection against unconscious wishes, but it's also a covert, round the houses kind of way of expressing them. Symptoms take many forms. They may be obsessional, which is the kind of the ritualistic, checking 10 times whether you've locked the door before you leave the house. Those kind of, where there is something of the unconscious being expressed there. That'll be different in anybody who says, well, that means this. It is nonsense. It will mean something very different to each person. But that's kind of an obsessional symptom. There's just had a feather drop onto my laptop. The hysterical symptoms, often symptoms of the body. Kind of stomach complaints can often be hysterical symptoms where there doesn't seem to be an organic reason for the bodily pain. We're going to talk lots more about hysteria in these videos because it's obviously a very charged and loaded and controversial term. Phobic symptoms, whatever they are, they both conceal and reveal unconscious conflicts which stem from the Oedipus complex. Freud firmly believed, and he developed this belief through a lot of work, that it's not enough in an analytic setting to decode the symptom and just simply explain it to the patient. There's this idea, Noam Chomsky, I think, it politically kind of expresses this idea that if actually I don't know if Chomsky does. I'm not going to put this at Chomsky's door, but you certainly hear it argued that if only people knew what was happening in the world, what politically was happening, how we're all being screwed over, if everybody knew that, we would all revolt against it and the world would be a better place. Freud doesn't believe that, and psychoanalysis doesn't believe that. Understanding is not enough, because there are all sorts of unconscious things going on under the surface. One of those in an analytic setting, but also very much in a political setting, is transference. It's how we transfer, we transfer certain conflicts or feelings onto the analyst, onto the politician who's up for election. And those feelings were originally attached to somebody else, usually parents, but we transfer them onto everybody we meet. The transference works in all kind of encounters, but it certainly happens in psychoanalysis in a very intense way. And this transference creates a new situation in the analytic setting. A problem from outside becomes a new problem inside the analytic setting, and a problem that can be worked with through analysis. And the talking cure, the cure of psychoanalysis, I'm hesitant to use the word cure, but let's call it that because that's what the first great psychoanalytic patient described it as, the talking cure. It's, in a sense, it's a filling in of certain gaps in the patient's narrative. This is what psychoanalysis really works with. It works with gaps and holes. And that filling in might very well be new material. It might not be a process of archaeology, of working out what happened. It might be creating a new narrative onto what may or may not have happened. I'm more or less going to leave it there in terms of Freud. But there's a few questions that come out of this. A couple of kind of famous, I guess, oft-repeated questions about Freud. One of them is does Freud just reduce everything down to sex? Well, no. I mean, he doesn't at all. He's classically a dualist. He in almost everything in Freud there is a dualism there. But he talks just as much about preservation instincts as he does about sexual instincts. But it's certainly true that he does see sexuality as utterly central to our subjectivity. The other question that's, I think, often asked by people on the left about Freud is he an individualist? And I think clearly he is not an individualist. The whole project of psychoanalysis concerns the relationship between one human and another, one human and others, one human and the rest of society. The human subject is only comes into being as a result of its object relations, of its social relations. So this is, and also I think 20th century psychoanalysis is very firmly based in families and social structures which are changing, and if they change, if they disappear altogether, as the way that we live changes, psychoanalysis obviously has to change with it. This is not a universalist theory. It's very much a materialist theory. And Lacan somewhere, I can't remember the quote, but he says that psychoanalysis couldn't have happened at any other time. It had to happen when it did, and no doubt it will evolve and become obsolete itself in time. I think it still works as a theory, but we need to do quite different things with it than what Freud was doing and his colleagues in Vienna in the early 20th century. And so I'm going to go on in the next video to talk about where Lacan takes psychoanalysis. So that's it for part 1. This is the first video I've made, and they're taking longer than I thought they would, which is probably because I'm rambling. But I hope that was relatively clear, and see you on the next video for a bit of Lacan.